Good morning, everybody. We are in Joshua chapter 14 this morning. We are also, what is that? That is sunlight coming through, putting those dots right there. That's literally the sun shining through two holes in the blinds in the boardroom of the Holiday Garden Inn and Stables or wherever the hell I am right now. So that's why there's two dots on my head. That's not a laser indicator from an HKG3 or anything like that I know of. Joshua chapter 14, pressing onward with the concept that obedience brings blessing. This portion of the book of Joshua, Yehoshua, is tedious. It's a bunch of names and places in Hebrew that don't bear any immediate relevance to our lives, therefore seems pretty laborious. However, obedience brings blessing, and back when this channel was little itty bitty, when it had 2,000 subscribers, the Father punched me in the forehead and said, "You will read my word." And I said, "Sir, I am." And he said, "On camera." And I was like, oh snap, that is not the deal we had. And he said, "Did I stutter?" And I said, no, you did not. So I committed to you and to him that we would read every word of this Bible together. And there are days when it brings me great joy to read this word with y'all. And there are days when it's a chore. And there are days like today where it's kind of in between. My heart is right in the reading of this word. I'm encouraged to read it. But what we're going to read is a bunch of Hebrew words. So I would encourage you to read along, as always, because you don't have my permission to subcontract your faith to me. And also because the Father may tease something out of this for you that you needed to hear. And with the 3-minute preamble, let's read Joshua 14. Now, these are the children of Israel, inherited in the land of Canaan, which Eleazar the priest and Yehoshua son of Nun, and the heads of the fathers of the tribes of the children of Israel caused them to inherit. Caused them to inherit. I mean, we could just stop right there. The Father promised it to them, to Israel. Everywhere your foot treads, that will be yours. And he created the opportunity for Israel. But he did not just hand it to them on a silver platter. That is something that is so missed in today's society by a lot of people, not by everybody, but a lot of people think that if you pray a prayer of provision, the magical sky daddy will just put it in your hand. That is not how Yahweh does business. If you pray a prayer of provision and blessing, or if you are in covenant with him, he remembers you as you remember him. And he creates the opportunity for you and him to go on a journey together to get that thing that you talked about, or to do that thing that you talked about, or to be that place that you talked about. Be it his will. If it's not his will, there's no amount of struggling against his will that's going to make it happen. All right, their inheritance was by lot, as Yahweh had commanded by the hand of Moses, for the 9 tribes and the half-tribe, because remember, Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh are on the eastern side of the Jordan. The other 9.5 tribes have gone into the promised land and will divide that land by lot. For Moshe had given them the inheritance of the 2 tribes and the half-tribe beyond the Jordan, but to the Levites he gave no inheritance in their midst. There's a lot of mention of Levites in here throughout this portion of the word, and how they have no inheritance. What they have are cities, and they have the portion that is brought unto Yah for provision when offerings are made, and land around their cities to graze their animals. And at first, it felt almost kind of like complaining to me. How many times we got to bring up the fact that the Levites don't have land? And I got to thinking about it, and I think, this is me speaking, not the Bible. I think that the reason it's in there so many times is to remind the Levites they don't get an inheritance of land, because to be trusted with the Father's work is in of itself, how shall I say this? You have duties and responsibilities right there that perhaps anybody else wouldn't understand, let alone to be working land and building community and so forth and so on. And so the provision for the Levite is always made so that they can be engaged in the work of Yah and supported by those around them, so that when the works of Yah are needed in the lives of those around them, the Levite is in a position of strength to bring the word, to perform the service, to do what needs to happen. But also so that the children of Levi don't get big in the britches and try and do both and half-ass both of those things, or accumulate so much power because they're operating under the authority of Yah and they're powerful merchants. That would not be good either. And so I think it's a reminder just as much for Levi as it is for everybody else. Hey, you don't have an inheritance in the land. Your job is to serve Yah. You don't work the land. You're not a merchant. You're not out there sawing logs. That's not what you do. You are in service unto Yah. You don't have an inheritance. Yah is your inheritance and your provision and your blessing. So, again, that's me speaking. Verse 4, for the children of Joseph had become 2 tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim, and they gave no part to the Levites in their land except cities to dwell in, with their open land for their livestock and their possessions. I have a little star next to this phrase right here. For the children of Joseph had become 2 tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim. Remember that, because later in this word, the 2-house concept is going to return again. And it's not a rabbit hole. It's a freaking hole to the center of the earth right there when it comes to importance. But we're not there yet. So just remember the concept of 2-house. The children of Joseph have become Manasseh and Ephraim. Remember, half of Manasseh is on one side of the Jordan already. So you got Manasseh and Ephraim. And as Yahweh had commanded Moshe, so the children of Israel did, and they divided the land. And the children of Yehuda, of Judah, came to Joshua in Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, and said to him, you know the word which Yahweh said to Moshe, the man of Elohim, concerning you and me in Kadesh Barnea. I was 40 years old when Moshe, the servant of Yahweh, sent me to Kadesh Barnea. This is Caleb speaking to Joshua. I was 40 years old when Moshe, the servant of Yahweh, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I brought back word to him as it was in my heart. But my brothers who went up with me made the heart of my people melt, but I followed Yahweh my Elohim completely. Caleb and Joshua being the 2 spies out of the 12 who were sent in to spy out the promised land, who reported back accurately, positively. Everybody else was like, no, there's giants in the land. It's not worth the trouble, yada, yada, yada. And then because of that, 10-2, Israel wanders in the wilderness for 40 years so that all of the generation that rejected the promised land can die off. And that's not me theorizing. That's literally what it says in the word. They rejected the promised land. They all die off, and a new generation, 40 years later, goes into the promised land. So Moshe swore on that day, saying, the land on which your foot has trodden is your inheritance and your children's forever, because you have followed Yahweh my Elohim completely. And now, see, Yahweh has kept me alive. And he said, these 45 years since Yahweh spoke this word to Moshe while Israel walked in the wilderness. So, Caleb's like, look, man, that was 45 years ago. He's kept me alive for 45 years. Now, they wandered for 40 years. They spent the last 5 swinging the sword in the promised land. So we have this perception that they just, again, rolled into the promised land, and it was good to go, bro. Yeah, by the hand of the sword, it was made good to go. Now, again, Yah presented the opportunity to them. And they leaned into that opportunity, and they spent 5 years swinging swords on behalf of the Most High to gain the blessing that was promised to them. Boy, are there lessons in here for us. Patience, work ethic, trusting in Yah to keep his promises, to remain in covenant with you, that he is faithful and true. Yet I am still as strong today as I was on the day that Moshe sent me. As my strength was then, so my strength is now for battle and for going out, for coming in. Man, I'm as good today as I was the day that Moshe sent us into the promised land. And now, give me this mountain of which Yahweh spoke in that day. For you heard in that day how the Anakim were there, the giants, and that the cities were great and walled. If Yahweh is with me, then I shall dispossess them, as Yahweh said. So, Caleb, at 85 years old, is like, hey, bro, remember 45 years ago when we went into the promised land to spy it out? I said, yo, check out that mountain. It's full of giants. Yahweh said that was my giant. That was my mountain. And if it's good with you, I'm going to go up there and get my mountain. Don't worry about me. I've got just as much gas in the tank as I did 45 years ago. Then Joshua blessed him and gave Hebron to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, as an inheritance. So Hebron became the inheritance of Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, to this day, because he followed Yahweh, Elohim of Israel, completely. Now the name of Hebron was formerly Kiriath Arba. Arba was the greatest man among the Anakim, and the land had rest from fighting. It took 45 years. 45 years for Caleb to get the chunk of land that he and Yah had talked about. 45 years. And 40 of that was spent walking through the wilderness, watching people die off, and 5 of it was spent in open warfare. Do we hear Caleb complaining? No, he's got to go dispossess giants now just to get the chunk of land that Yah promised to him. And he's like, I'm good to go, bro. Yeah, I'm 85, but I can still swing this sword. Let's do it. Contrast that against the people who were dying off during the Exodus out there in the wilderness. They're like, oh, Moshe, it's so hot. What are we going to eat? We want meat. I don't want this strange bread. How come there's no water? Blah, 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 blah. You just bring us out here to die. We'd rather be slaves in Mitzrayim. Caleb's like, bro, I'm good. Let's do it. 45 years. Because he followed Yahweh Elohim of Israel completely. And the lot of the tribe of the children of Yehuda of Judah for their clans was the border of Edom to the wilderness of Sin, southward in the extreme south. And the southern border began at the edge of the Salt Sea from the bay that faces southward. And it went out to the southern side of the ascent of the Akrabim, passed over to Sin and went up to the south side of Kadesh Barnea, and passed over to Hetzron and went up to Adar, and went around to Karka, and passed over to Atzman, and went out to the Wadi of Mitzrayim, and the border ended at the sea. This is your southern border. This is Judah we're talking about here. And the east border was the Salt Sea as far as the end of the Jordan. And the border on the northern quarter began at the bay of the sea and at the end of the Jordan. And the border went up to Beth Hogla and passed over north of Beth Arabah. And the border went up to the stone of Bohan, son of Reuben. And the border went up toward Debir from the valley of Achor, and it turned northward towards Gilgal, which is before the ascent of the Adumim, which is south of the Wadi. And the border passed over to the waters of En Shemesh and ended at En Rogel. And the border went up to the valley of the son of Hinnom, to the southern slope of the Jebusite city, that is Jerusalem. The Jebusite city was Jerusalem. This is how Judah gets Jerusalem. This is how the Jews, the Yehudim, end up in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem. And the border went up to the top of the mountain that lies before the valley of Hinnom, westward, which is at the end of the valley of Rephaim, northwards. Rephaim, what are the Rephaites? The Rephaim. Those were the giants, the valley of giants. And the border went around from the top of the hill to the fountain of the water of Nephtovah, and went to the cities of Mount Ephron. And the border went around Bela, and that is Kiriath Yearim. And the border turned from Bela westward to Mount Seir and passed over the side of Mount Yearim to the north, that is Kesalam, and went down to Beth Shemesh and passed over to Timnah. And the border went out to the side of Ekron northward, and the border went around to Shikaron and passed over to the Mount Bela and went out to Yabneel. The border ended at the sea. This is the east border. They're giving us markers here. If you had a map in front of you, this would make a lot more sense. And I don't have a map in front of me, but I do have a map in the back of this Bible. And as you can see here, maybe or maybe not see, this is the map in the back of the scriptures. I refer to it often. And so on this side, you have Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh on this side of the Jordan. And over here, you have Yehuda or Judah. Okay, so this is the area we're talking about right now. But also note that you have West Manasseh here and Ephraim. So East Manasseh stays over here. West Manasseh goes over here. And then this section of Manasseh, the children of Joseph split from Manasseh and Ephraim. Okay, so that's the split that we're talking about here. The two-house thing. Which again, we'll come back to. Two-house, new, the number 2 Torah. Zach at New 2 Torah has good teachings on two-house. When it's time, we'll come to two-house. There's a shade that I'm going to close right now so that these dots disappear from my face and or eyeball, because it's moderately distracting. But luckily, the boardroom chairs roll, so I don't even have to get up. Hold on a minute. Boom. Handled. All right. So, back to Joshua 15. Verse 12, and the west border was the coastline of the great sea. This is the boundary of the children of Judah all around for their clans. And to Caleb, remember Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, he gave a portion in the midst of the children of Judah, according to the mouth of Yahweh to Yehoshua. Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron. Arba was the father of the Anak, the Anakim, the giants. The Anakim were a subset of the Nephilim, the giants, Genesis 6:4, the polluted flesh. The main reason, or definitely in the top three, why the Father destroyed the earth with flooding during the time of Noah, because all flesh had been polluted. And only of the remnant that was preserved, only 8 people represented the remnant that the Father preserved. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their 3 wives. But we know from Genesis 6:4 that there were giants in those days and after. Well, that means that somebody had corrupted flesh on that ship. And this is a whole nother discussion for another time, massive rabbit hole. But there's a lot of good theorizing and teaching on that. But most likely, one of Noah's 3 daughter-in-laws. Was it Ham? Ham's wife? Some people think it was Ham's wife. But we digress. So, the Anakim came from the Nephilim, the giants that came out of the union of angels, fallen angels, and human flesh. And then they did all kinds of nasty stuff, like it's where you get like centaurs and minotaurs from, and satyrs and all that pagan stuff that was worshipped. All those things were an outcropping of the unions that caused the Nephilim. And the genetic mutations, naturally or unnaturally caused, that produced these things that had to be slaughtered to cleanse the bloodlines. And there were some leftovers, the Anakim. And so Caleb at 85 is like, got this. Let's go. Hebron sounds good. Yeah, I'll take it. Oh, giants, not a problem. Boys, grab your swords. Giants, let's roll. All right. And to Caleb, son of Jephunneh, he gave a portion in the midst of the children of Judah according to the mouth of Yahweh, to Yehoshua, to Joshua. Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron. Arba was the father of Anak, the Anakim. And Caleb drove out the 3 sons of Anak from there, Sheshai and Ahiman and Talmai, the children of Anak. So 3 giants. Caleb's like, got this. 45 years of waiting, 85 years old, and there's not 1, not 2, there's 3 giants hanging out on his piece of land. Does he moan and complain and beseech God? Or does he go, Roger that. Boys, grab your swords. This even helps me, honestly, because my life has not been without friction lately. It's like, yeah, whose life is without friction? And do those people even have a sense of purpose and meaning if they live a frictionless life? And the answer is no, they don't. And this is encouraging to me as well, really, because there's good instruction in here. The Father sets you on a path, get after it, and don't expect it to be easy. Don't conflate easy and good. And he went up from there, Caleb, to the inhabitants of Debir, and the name of Debir formerly was Kiriath Sepher. And Caleb said, he who strikes Kiriath Sepher and shall capture it, to him I shall give Achsah, my daughter, as a wife. He's like, I like that place too. Anybody who can take that place, you can marry my daughter. And it came to be, when she came to him, that she persuaded him to ask her father for a field. And when she got off from the donkey, Caleb said to her, what is the matter? And she said, give me a blessing. Since you have given me land in the south, give me also fountains of water. And he gave her the upper fountains and the lower fountains. I got land. I got a place to run my animals. I got no water. Hook it up, Dad. Give me a blessing. Oh, we skipped the whole verse, 17. And Othniel, son of Kenaz, the brother of Caleb, did capture it. So he gave him Achsah, his daughter, as his wife. Now, you could say that this is an uncle marrying a niece, and it is. There's really no way around that, and I'm not saying I'm in support of that, but there it is. You could also say that Othniel looked at Achsah and was like, that's a bunch of land over there, a whole city, and land, and now fountains. I'm in. Let's do this thing. He did the cost-benefit analysis, and he was like, yeah, she's my niece, but land, yo. Anywho. This was the inheritance of the tribes of the children of Judah for their clans. And the cities at the furthest border of the tribe of the children of Judah toward the border of Edom to the south were Kapseel and Eder and Yagor and Kina and Dimonah and Adabah and Kadesh and Hatzor and Yithnan and Ziph and Telem and Beth Loth and Hatzor and Hadatah and Kerioth Hetzron, that is Hatzor, Amam and Shema and Molada and Hatzar Gadah and Heshmon and Beth Pelet and Hatzor, Shaul and Beersheba and Bizioyath and Bela and Eam and Etzem and Eltodad and Kessel and Horma and Siklach and Madmanah and Sansana and Lebauth and Shechalim and Ain and Rimmon. All the cities were 29 with their villages. And in the low country, Eshatol and Soar and Ashna and Zanova and En-Ganim and Tapuvah and Enam and Yarmuth and Adulam and Soka and Azekah and Sha'arim and Adianim and Gederah and Gederathim, 14 cities and their villages. And Sainan and Hadashah and Hadashah. Ooh. That's right. And Migdal Gad. And Dilan and Mitzpah and Yokeeth and Lachish and Botzgath and Eglon and Kabon and Lamam and Kitzlish and Gederoth and Beth Dagon and Nama and Makedah, 16 cities with their villages. And Libnah and Ether and Ashan. All these little villages, by the way, or not all of, I don't know that for a fact, but I do know that many names in here stick out. Nama, for example, and Horma being another one that I know just off the top of my head, that I had a book back in the day on demonology, and there were multiple hundreds of named demons in there, and bear in mind, it could be complete hogwash, but it gave attributes of each one and locations and cities they were tied to from back in the day. And a lot of these cultures that were displaced by the Israelites who worship Yahweh Elohim, the one true God, worshipped all kinds of pagan idolatry and bullshizer. And many of them had a patron god, lowercase g God, that they worshiped, that they would worship in the worst ways possible. Offerings of blood, human sacrifice, fornication, the destruction of their children unto the God. It was absolutely terrible. And so it's often posited the question, how would a righteous God allow for the wholesale slaughter of human beings which he had created? Because if he created everything, he created these people that the Israelites wiped out. And the answer is they rejected the Father, and they rejected his laws and his right rulings, the rules that allow us all to live together in harmony to the best of our ability. And we still get it wrong, which is why we have a system for justice within the Torah as well. Mistakes are made, but there's not many ways that you can put large groups of people together in societies and have them function at a high level. And if you look at the great belief systems of the world, there is a lot of congruency now, and I'm not saying, just so we're clear, Yeshua is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through Yeshua. But I am saying that societally, different societies have figured out that there are ways which a human being should operate and ways which a society should operate that are very congruent regardless of where you go around the world. There's only so many different ways that you can put a society together and have it function for any great length of time. And the people that were displaced by the Israelites had rejected openly all that the Father had presented to them in this Torah, the instruction. So we hear all the time, the law. It was the law of sin and death. Well, read your effing Bible, okay? It's the instruction and the laws and the right rulings. Why? So that you might be blessed. That's literally what Deuteronomy 28 says, so that you might be blessed. Well, these people that were displaced were not doing the law, and they were not just in light transgression of the law. They were grievously transgressing the law. They had built their entire civilization around grievously transgressing the law. And the Father understands us, and he understands how fragile we can be, and that his system of existence cannot coexist with these antithetical systems of existence. They don't mesh. And when you try and enmesh them, you pollute the goodness that is the Father's system of belief. And so they are oil and water. They do not go together. And because one cannot exist in the presence of the other, those backed by Yahweh were given authority by Yahweh to remove this system from the playing field. So, part of why they were removed from the playing field, again, this is me speaking, not the Bible, is that these places were in many cases dedicated unto entities like demons. And two that jump right out to me are Horma and Nama, which I give those words no power and no authority. But interestingly as well, you have Hadashah, the Brit Hadashah. Brit means to cut. Hadashah means like renewed or made new, right? So that's why you have the Brit Hadashah, the new cut. You ever heard to cut a deal? That's a Hebraic saying. There's always a cut. There's always blood when a deal is made. The blood of Yeshua sealed that new deal for us, the renewed covenant in Hebrews 8:8. The Brit Hadashah is the renewed cut, the covenant, because that covenant was made by the blood of Yeshua. So that's just an interesting phrase as well. And so those names jumped out at me, and the reason they jumped out at me, I think, deserved a little bit of explanation and context. But these were not city-dwelling suburbanites just going after about their daily life. And even if some of them were those that were dispossessed and destroyed, they were caught up in a culture that was completely antithetical to Yahweh or Elohim. They could not coexist. And that, of course, there's a teaching in there for us as well. There are cultures today that cannot coexist with the Father's word and the Father's teachings. And we do ourselves a disservice by trying to make Christianity, the following of Yeshua HaMashiach, of Jesus the Christ, as inclusive as possible. Because inclusivity is one half of the story that's represented in this Bible. Exclusivity is the other half. If everybody, how shall I say this? The testimony of Yeshua HaMashiach is available to every single person on earth. Not everybody will receive that testimony. And there are those that will openly and actively oppose that testimony. Cast not your pearls before swine. Don't waste your time with those people. Move on. Shake the sand off your sandals and move on. Because there is an exclusivity. This is the nation of Israel and everybody else seen throughout the Bible. Even Yeshua says, I come first, but for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And he did. And it's only in Acts chapter 10 where Peter has his vision of the Father saying, what I have made clean, no man calls unclean. Bring the gospel to the Gentiles. And it pisses me off because people say, see, Bear, we can eat bacon. Peter's vision in Acts chapter 10. And I'm like, did you read all of Acts chapter 10 and then Acts chapter 11 that goes into it from there that offers even further clarification so that you don't get it wrong? So that we realize that that vision had nothing to do with food, because even Peter doubts in his mind what the vision was about. Then he meets 3 Gentiles. Then he goes, that's what that vision was about in Acts chapter 10. Then they go into depth in that in Acts chapter 11. And it becomes clear that no, that it was in no way about food. It was about the bringing of the gospel to all nations, the nations, those that are not Israel. And so the most important thing that has ever happened in the history of the universe, the redemption of all peoples, is used by the church, or at the very least church goers, to say, see, we can eat a ham sandwich now. I'm like, that's very clearly unclean, and it's wicked because it denies everything that's written in this Bible when you make that argument. But I'm on a tangent, and I apologize. There are systems of belief that are incongruent with serving Yah. And at some point, the service to Yah, coupled with the critical mass of these inconsistent belief systems, come to a head. And the Father says, that's it. I've had enough. I will preserve a remnant, but the rest of y'all, judgment time, baby. The next time we see Yeshua, judgment time. Revelation 19. Anyway, back to the book. Libnah and Ether and Ashan and Yiftah and Ashna and Netzib and Keliah and Akzib and Marashah, 9 cities with their villages, and Ekron and its town and its villages, from Ekron to the sea, all that were by the side of Ashdod with their villages, Ashdod, its towns, its villages, Azah, its towns and its villages, as far as the Wadi of Mitzrayim. Wadi is a dry riverbed. And the great sea with its coastline. And in the mountain country, Shamor and Yatir and Sokah and Dana and Kiriath Sana, that is Debir and Anab and Eshtamo and Anim and Goshen, or Goshen, depending on who you talk to, and Holan and Gilo, 11 cities with their villages, Arab and Duma and Ishan and Yanim and Beth Tupovah and Aphekah and Hutama and Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, and Seor, 9 cities with their villages, Maon, Karbel, Ziph, Utah, Yisrael, Kokedam and Zanova, Cain, Gibna, Timnah, 10 cities with their villages, Chalchul, Beth Sor, Gedor, and Mara, and Beth Anath, and El-Ketan, 6 cities with their villages. Kiriath Baal, that is Kiriath Yearim, and Rabbah, 2 cities with their villages. And in the wilderness, Beth Arabah, Medin, and Sekaka. Something of note here, the cities and their villages. It's kind of like the cities and their suburbs, the workforce that is outside of the city that allows the city to exist in the first place. This is a concept that's been around a long while, the daily commute. And a lot of these were about an hour's walk. You know, you find most of these villages are within a few miles. For example, as Yeshua is moving around Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, it was a 2-mile walk, 3-mile walk, a Sabbath day journey, right? So you could get from your house to the temple or the synagogue and get back again. They're close, even though they're removed from one another. They're still close. 3 miles is hell. That's just getting started on a ruck, right? Like, do that under an hour with a heavy pack on. So it's not that far away. And to ride a donkey or a bicycle, it's nothing. So, and Nibshan and the city of Salt and En-Gedi, 6 cities with their villages. As for the Jebusites, the inhabitants of Yerushalayim, the children of Judah were unable. As for the Jebusites, the inhabitants of Yerushalayim, the children of Judah were unable to drive them out. So the Jebusites have dwelt with the children of Judah at Yerushalayim to this day. Now, remember, go back a few chapters. That's the end of 15, by the way. These Jebusites, where is it? So many words, all the Hebrew. There it is. So these are the guys in Joshua chapter 9 who come to Joshua. They load up their donkeys and they wear old torn garments and old torn wineskins and cover everything with dust. They just take a quick ride. A couple days, come to Joshua and they're like, oh, can we have some water, some food, please? Man, we've been on the road for months. Listen, we heard about you Israelites. We would like to make a covenant with you. And they're like, all right, we'll make a covenant with you. But the men of Israel said to the Hivites, it could be that you dwell in our midst, so how could we make a covenant with you? And they said to Joshua, we are your servants. And Joshua said to them, who are you and where do you come from? They said to him, from a land very far off your servants have come because of the name of Yahweh your Elohim, for we have heard the report of him and all that he did in Mitzrayim. And Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them to let them live, and the rulers of the congregations swore to them. And it came to be at the end of 3 days after they had made a covenant with them that they heard that they were their neighbors who dwelt near them. So that's how you end up with Jebusites in Jerusalem. Because it is Torah, let your yes be yes and your no be no. If you make a covenant, do everything you freaking can to keep it. Which is why, even during sabbatical, we read the word together. And I appreciate y'all deeply, and I hope that this time that we spent together with the Father would be counted a blessing. And yeah, thanks. Shalom, y'all.